good morning, everybody. It's great to see you this weekend. Is this a perfect autumn day in the Bay? Oh my goodness. Love living in Cali, in the will of God. It's great to see you this morning. We are in our fall series called This Is Us, all about relationships. Already we're at weekend number 10, and we are talking about relationships with your kids. So parenting with a purpose. Listen, isn't it strange how princes and kings and clowns who caper in sawdust rings and common people like you and me are the builders of eternity? For we're all given a bag of tools, an amorphous mass, and a set of rules upon which to build before time has flown. A stumbling block or a stepping stone. That's parenting, man. Are you in the lives of the people that look up to you, the people whom you're influencing? Are you a stumbling block? Are you tearing them down? Or are you a stepping stone, building them up, urging and encouraging them on to their full potential? Believe me when I say this to you this weekend at the Bay, you can be a great parent. Believe that. Believe me when I tell you that you can have a happy home, you can raise great kids. Believe me when I tell you that God is for you, that the crowd around you right now is for you, that I am for you, that you will get this done with God's help. Believe that. Approach it with that kind of a mentality, okay? Reach for your notes if you would, please. You have a hard copy option. We've also got an online digital option at YouVersion. Want to bid a very warm welcome as well to our Facebook and online audience. So glad to have you joining us this weekend. The previous 2 weekends and now today, as we wrap up this parenting piece in our This Is Us series, we've had a singular guiding principle that begins with the words, the secret. I want you to read this with me now. Would you please begin? The secret to successful parenting is to treat our children just like God the Father treats us. Let's say it one more time. Would you please begin? The secret to successful parenting is to treat our children just like God the Father treats us. I want you to hide that principle in your heart forever because it's true and it will serve you well. Let's do a quick review from where we've come these last 2 weekends. We laid a foundation for effective parenting, and we said there are 3 pieces. First of all, we have to understand our children, then we have to accept our children, then we have to rear our children to love God. Those were the 3 foundation pieces, and then we began a journey with 10 common sense biblical principles. For rearing the kind of children we all dream of rearing. We want children that are healthy, spiritual, positive, and successful. And so principle number 1 was to create a home that is marriage-centered, not child-centered. When you have a happy, loving, growing marriage, it is the bedrock, the foundation upon which that whole house can stand. It cannot begin with children. It must begin with healthy marriage. Secondly, create a home environment based on the transforming power of love. Love is the greatest change agent in the history of the planet, which is why the Bible says, for God so loved the world, because love changes us. Thirdly, we need to model for our children what it looks like to love and respect the Lord. Fourth, we need to be courageous, and it does take courage in building character in our sons and daughters. Number 5, we said an important goal of discipline is to help our children associate consequence with wrongdoing and thus help them go to heaven. Now, each one of us in a changing, swirling world in the 21st century, we're going to have to decide a fundamental issue in the core of our being, and it's this. Does truth change because we change? In other words, does truth change because human culture changes generations come and go, nations rise and fall, or is truth a permanent, enduring bedrock? I would suggest to you humbly, my own conclusion is truth does not change because we change. We change, and as we get ever further, we impale ourselves with all kinds of pain that the Father never intended. Number 6, we need to discern between childish responsibility and willful disobedience. Do you remember that? What are we doing there? We are understanding the motive of our children's heart. Number 7, we are shaping our child's will without breaking their spirit. Have you discovered that being a parent, that having children is to forever decide to have your heart go walking along outside your body? To have kids is a love of a different kind. I've never experienced anything like it. Married love is beautiful. Having children is a love of a different kind, and it seems, how old's my oldest? 33, that ever since she arrived, my heart has been walking along outside my body because so many things happen that are what? Outside our control. Now, in the 21st century, there are all kinds of parenting strategies. I mean, a wide range of parenting strategies, like this one. Watch.
Sometimes parents, we just fail at advice. I remember my mom when I was a kid. She used to give me good advice too late. Think about it, good advice too late. Like when I was a kid, I hit my head on the corner of the table. Careful! Imagine kids not whining. No screaming fits or squeals when they don't get the toy they want in their Happy Meals. Imagine all the parents burning down Chuck E. Cheese. God gave me this song. Boys, they just make up games like they want to hurt themselves. They do. I'm like out in the backyard one time, my son comes out, "Hey, Dad, throw that brick at me and see if I can get out of the way." Yeah. This game, it's called Dodge Brick. It's great. Fling one right at my head and don't tell me when you throw it. I'll try to listen for the whiz. Don't you judge me. Because it wasn't until that brick left my hand, I was thinking, this is probably not a good idea. Whoa! Careful!
I do not advocate that strategy. Number 8, fill it in, would you please? 8 out of 10, transformational, life-giving principles. Rules without a relationship usually leads to rebellion. You say, John, what does that mean? It means this, that if we have no relationship with our children, and then we start to lay a heavy trip on them at age 13, they will run away from home. In other words, the closer our relationship, I mean genuine friendship with our children in their preteen years, it will be much easier to be a parent in the years following. So it's about building a loving relationship. Now, you are still the parent, but it's not going to always be like this. For most of our lives, it's going to be like this, and we've got to make the transition from this parent-child to this cherished friends for a lifetime. And so I encourage you to think about, am I genuinely a friend to my children? Do they enjoy my company? Do we do fun stuff together? I mean, are you aware of the music in your child's life? What turns them on? What creates wonder and excitement and thrills them, even if you think it's stupid? what thrills them, and then do that thing with them a lot. Navigate in their orbit, show up in their orbit, because you can pretend to care, but you cannot pretend to show up. Love shows up. Friendship shows up. And if we've built a relationship of friendship from the earliest days with our children, we'll not have out of control raging teenage years. I had an agreement with my kids. So my kids came in life with kind of a weird job because their dad had kind of a weird job, right? Being a PK, a preacher's kid's different. You ought to talk to my kids sometime. They'll be moving here next year, so you'll have a lot of time to talk to them. But whatever they tell you, you check with me, and I'll tell you whether it's actually true or false. You let me know. I said to my kids growing up, kids, I got a deal for you. I'll go to your games, and you come to my sermons. Now, as a family, we went to church. We didn't vote on it. How many of you want to go to church this weekend? All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, same sign. In the Gregg home, part of our DNA, it was who we were. That was never a conversation. We went. However, I showed up at their games. In fact, I coached Little League for 12 years. And I am not setting myself up as perfect parent. I just needed to find a place to be engaged, and that's where I was engaged. And I loved the kids for 12 years. It was the parents that drove me crazy. Living out their little id, ego, and super ego from the bleachers, screaming at their 8-year-old. I mean, what's that about? Dude, get a life. Anyhow, sorry, didn't mean to be bitter there. It just kind of crept out after 12 years, those things happen. I said to my children growing up, sons and daughters, you will preach the gospel when you're a big person. Now, I don't know if you're going to be a plumber. I don't know if you're going to be an accountant. Actually, I don't really care. But what I do know is when you grow up, you will want to walk with the God of your fathers and your mothers. You say, John, why is that? Because I had a relationship of friendship with them. And if you build your life together with your child on the foundation of friendship, you are setting up an extremely healthy future. Number 9, fill it in. The power of life and death is in the tongue. You said, well, John, you've already said that a couple times. Yes, and it's so important now that we are making it one of these 10 biblical common sense principles. I'm urging you with every fiber of my being, as a fellow human being, as a fellow parent, now a grandfather, as your pastor, I'm begging you, please, 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 please embrace this principle. This truth that the power of life and death is in the tongue. I beg you, please embrace this principle. We are setting up the future of our house by the words that come from this hole in our face. We are setting up our children's whole life by what comes out of our mouths. We are setting up the tape recorder in the head of our children that will be playing every day of their lives for the next 75 years. The influence of the first 10, 15, 18 years of life is out of all proportion to all the rest of life put together. Position your children to be men and women of compassion and optimism and faith and confidence and robust self-esteem, intimate relationship with God from their infancy by the words that come out of our mouths. Life or death, you choose. I did not include this scripture in your notes, but I want you to write it down now if you would, please. Guys, this is particularly for us. Colossians chapter 3, verse 21. It's a dandy. Colossians 3:21. The Bible says, fathers, interesting, in this context, not mothers, fathers, do not embitter your children or they will become discouraged. Some of you are wondering why your kids have switched off. They've shut down. You can't get them out of their room. They're hiding away all the time. You think, man, my kid's weird. My kid's antisocial. My kid, I bet you if you're courageous and humble and teachable, you will be able to trace it much to the environment that you have created in the home by the words that issue forth from our mouths, which issue directly from our hearts. Jesus said that. He said, out of the abundance of the heart, our mouths speak. If your kids have shut down, what they're trying to do is get away. They're trying to escape. Don't you retreat. Press in with compassion and find ways to engage them and get past the outside and get to their tender, impressionable inside. Number 10, fill it in, would you please? And we're going to spend the balance of our time this morning with principle number 10. Give your child your unconditional blessing. The principle is unconditional blessing. You say, John, what do you mean blessing? What actually does the Bible mean, blessing? Let me try to put it in 21st century terms. Your approval of them unconditionally, of them as a human being. Not everything they do, but of them. Your approval of them as a child of God. Your approval of them as your child. Give your child your unconditional blessing. Now, of the many reasons I revere this book, it's because it's so raw and real. I mean, I don't know if it's exactly the right thing to say. I don't really care. So I'm just going to say it. There's a lot of people in the Bible that are just straight up knuckleheads. I mean, I'm like, are you kidding me? And so we're going to read about one of these homes right now. I want you to take your Bible or your device, whatever's convenient for you, and I want you to join me in the very first book of the Bible. It's called Genesis, and we are at chapter number 27. Genesis chapter 27. It's about a family. The married couple is named Isaac and Rebekah, and they have twin sons named Esau and Jacob, and here is their story. Now, before I read this hysterical, incredible reality TV story in the 27th chapter of the book of Genesis, let me tell you what's going on. It's a story of family intrigue. It is a story of the brothers, Esau and Jacob, Esau being the older by a few minutes, having intense sibling rivalry, which was fueled exclusively by shameless parental favoritism. Let me pause here and say that if you got more than one kid, and everybody in the family knows who you like best, which kid you prefer, I promise you, you are setting up great pain down the road. It may happen after you're dead and gone, and they're all duking it out over your living will or your estate or your trust or whatever the deal is. Oh yeah, the hate will go on then. The resentment, the bitterness, stir it all in, mix it up. We humans do that. And these parents, Isaac and Rebekah, of these two boys, each had a favorite. For Isaac, the father, he preferred manly Esau, the firstborn. For Rebekah, the mother, she preferred the son, which was much more like herself, clever and devious and manipulative. And so we see their saga play out of these two very different guys. So I'm in Genesis 27. I'm going to start reading verse 1. We're not reading the whole chapter. I'm going to go fast. Let's have story time together. Remember kindergarten? Everything I learned in life, I learned in kindergarten. Milk and cookies, dim the lights, no laying down, but all the other ambiance, and here we go. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." "Here I am," Esau answered. Isaac said, I am now an old man, and I do not know the day of my death. So now then, get your weapons, your quiver and bow, and go out into the open country to hunt some wild game for me, and prepare me the kind of tasty food I like, and bring it to me to eat, my son, so that I may give you my blessing before I die. Now, let me remind you what a blessing is from an ancient Near Mid-Eastern context, because the Bible can never mean what the Bible never meant. So what does blessing mean to these people first before we try to figure it out as 21st century Americans, what we think it might mean? Fair enough? In the ancient Near Middle East, there was a real imbalance of influence among children, and it was all weighted toward the eldest or the firstborn son. You say, John, and you ladies may be thinking correctly, how incredibly unjust. Agreed. But that's how it was back in the day. So there was something called the double portion of the inheritance for the firstborn son. And it is what it says. He literally got twice as much as anybody else. So that really sets up good feelings among siblings, doesn't it? Just makes you want to love your older brother you'd like to kill and whatever. Okay. Furthermore, the blessing back in that day was not just about double portion of the inheritance. It was about the material goods that the father and mother had accumulated. It was about the father's authority. It was about the family's legacy. It was about the validity even of your genealogy. All these things were tied up in this pretty package called the blessing. That's what Isaac is about to give his son Esau. Now, Esau was the kind of son many of you men in the house want. High testosterone, manly. He had a masculine voice by the age of 5. And I'm not saying this, you'll see the Bible says this. The dude was intimidating because he was very hairy. Evidently, puberty, adolescence kicked in when he was about 7.5, and he is simply a specimen. And here you have Jacob, who's brothers to this guy, and Jacob's intimidated. He feels like a dwarf or just kind of a poor excuse for a man next to this awesome brother Esau. But the thing about Esau is Esau had no interest in the things of God. Esau had interest in Esau. Esau had interest in hunting. He had interest in ESPN. He had interest in Cabela's. He had interest in all the things that you would expect, monster trucks with massive wheels, all the things that that's what Esau was into. But his heart had no interest in the things of God. Let me continue reading. I'm in verse number 5. Now Rebekah, the mother, she was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. Notice not their son Esau, his son Esau. There was really a division in the house. Esau belonged to Isaac. Jacob belonged to Rebekah. And by the way, they lived in tents in those days. So it's not hard to eavesdrop, right? Listening as Isaac spoke to Esau, and when Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, Jacob, come over here. Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, bring me some game, prepare me some tasty food to eat. I'm going to give it to you, give it to me so I can eat it, and I'll give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord, Esau, before I die. So now my son, Rebekah said to Jacob, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats so I can prepare some tasty food for your father just the way he likes it. Then you will take that food to your dad to eat so that he may give you the blessing before he dies and not Esau. Intrigue, favoritism, treachery, deception happening in the house. I mean, for her to do this, I would assume most of us have some kind of estate planning, right? It's a legally binding document. It cannot be changed. And whoever the father in this context gives his blessings to, he can't say oops and 10 minutes later say, you know what, that's not the child I meant to give it to. I now actually want to give it to this child. Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, I'm in verse 11, but my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I'm a man with smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I'd appear to be tricking him, which is exactly what's happening. and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing. And his mother said to him, my son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go and get them for me. So he's going out to get these goats, right? So he went and got him and brought him to his mom, and she prepared some tasty food just the way that Isaac liked it. Verse number 15. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son, Jacob. You say, John, why would he do that? Because the aroma of the field, of the forest, of the great outdoors, right? And put them on her younger son Jacob. She also, noticed this, covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with the goat skins. This is rich, okay? Look at verse 17. Then she handed to her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread she'd made. He went to his father and said, my father. Yes, my son, he answered. Who is it? And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing. And Isaac asked his son, how did you find it so quickly, my son Esau? The Lord your God gave me success, Jacob replied. Then Isaac said to Jacob, come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not. Most of the time, you can tell the difference in voice of children. There are a few times it can really be difficult, but Isaac is just feeling really paranoid. Something is not right because he loves his son. When you're thinking of Esau going forward, remember Beauty and the Beast? Do you remember Gaston, where every last inch of him was covered with hair, that manly? That's exactly who Esau is, okay, in imagination. So he says, come close to me so that I can tell if you really are my son Esau or not. Verse number 22. So Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, well, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hairy hands are the hands of Esau. He did not recognize him, for his hands are hairy like those of his brother Esau. So he blessed him. Are you really my son Esau? Isaac asked yet again. I am, he replied. Then he said, my son, bring me some of your game to eat so that I may give you my blessing. And Jacob brought it to him, and he ate, and he gave him some wine, and he drank. And then his father Isaac said to him, come here, my son, and kiss me. He is still not convinced, people. Look at verse 27. So he went to him and kissed him, and when Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, how crafty is Rebekah to think of that, to put Esau's clothes on the little brother, right? Verse 27. The smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of heaven's dew and averse richness and abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers. He's only got one brother. Who could that possibly be? Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. Friends, the deed is done. Look at verse 30. And after Isaac finished blessing him, and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came into him from hunting. He too had prepared some tasty food and brought it to his father. And then he said to him, my father, sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing. And his father Isaac asked him, who are you? I am your son, he answered, your firstborn Esau. Notice verse 37, the game's up. Isaac trembled violently and said, who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed. And when Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me. Bless me too, my father. Bless me. Verse number 35. But he said, your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing, Esau. And Esau said, isn't he rightly named Jacob, which, by the way, everybody, means deceiver? He has deceived me these 2 times. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing. Okay, now, everybody, look at me here. This is what we call historical revisionism, which brothers and sisters frequently do to each other in families with lots of kids. He is conveniently, shall we say, misremembering. Jacob did not take his birthright. Esau, because he was such a shallow person in his soul and his spirit, had sold his birthright, his prerogative as the eldest son, to his little brother Jacob years before for a bowl of soup. But now he's blaming Jacob for that as well. Okay, I'm still in verse 36 at the very end. Then he asked, haven't you reserved any blessing for me? That's the third time Esau's brought it up. And Isaac answered Esau, I have made him lord over you, and I have made him lord over his relatives and his servants, and I've sustained him with grain and new wine. What can I possibly do for you, my son? Esau said to his father, do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father. And then Esau wept aloud. It's tragic. I'm thinking of the reminder in the New Testament says, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatsoever we sow, that shall we also reap. The chickens always come home to roost. Last thing I want to say, go down to verse number 41. Remember I said that if you have favoritism in your home, there will be payday. Check it out in verse 41. And Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are near, meaning Isaac's about to die. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. Period. So there's murder now living in Esau's heart. I want you to notice in this intriguing passage in Genesis 27 that 4 times the issue of Esau begging his father for the blessing arises. Make note of it. Verse 31, verse 34, verse 36, verse 38. Each time Esau is saying, bless me, Father. Father, can you not bless me too? Daddy, is there no blessing for me? Please, Dad, I'm begging you, bless me, Dad. And it was over. There's a very insightful individual named Bill Glass, and Bill actually for many years had one of the most effective ministry in America's prison system, communicating the love of God to individuals, primarily men, that were in prison for life. And he did a study. He said, I wonder what the commonality is. I wonder if there is consistent factors on why these men that are now hardened felons, as it were, did these things. And through many years of study, here's the primary conclusion of Bill Glass. He said, these violent criminals, shockingly, all had one consistent factor in their lives, and it was this: they hated their dad. That's a big part of what I think's going on with angry young men in America today shooting other human beings. There is an incredible amount of resentment, hostility, bitterness, and anger. And Bill Glass concluded, when a young man particularly, ladies as well, daughters as well, but when a young man does not have a sense that he's received his father's unconditional blessing, and I don't mean the Old Testament kind of a double portion of the inheritance. We're not a bunch of ancient wandering Hebrews in the desert. We're 21st century Americans. I'm talking about that unconditional approval of our sons and daughters as human beings, as a child of God is our child, and my child, I love you so much, I would die for you. That kind of a blessing, that when they do not receive the blessing from their father, these men, number one, either become angry or violent and end up in prison, or number two, they become overachievers. Now, I'm not going to say any names here. I can tell you, though, as a student of American culture, in a very detailed manner, myself, I'm referencing, over the last 30 years, I have seen half a dozen individuals that have risen to the highest place and prominence in American culture, and much of what fueled their ascendancy was resentment toward their father, and this is what they were trying to do: achieve much to prove to their father that they were worth their father's approval. They were worth their father's blessing. They were worth their father respecting them. In other words, when we deprive our children of our blessing, we create a yearning, gnawing hunger within, and they will either act out in violence or they will act out in overachieving obsession. Do we really want to leave that internal vacancy in our sons and daughters? Revenge and murder is now born in Esau's heart. By the way, another interesting insight, if you are reading out the rest of the passage, you may want to focus on verse 46, because now time has passed, and Rebekah says to Isaac, evidently just before he's died, I'm disgusted with living because of these Hittite women. If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land from Hittite women like these, my life will not be worth living. So there you have a very concerned mother thinking about her son Jacob, who now has the father's blessing, uniting his life with a woman who does not share faith in the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Because you'll lose your children and your grandchildren. I believe that my children are a gift of God, the hope of a new tomorrow. I believe that immeasurable possibilities lie slumbering in each one of my sons and daughters. And I believe that God has planned a perfect plan for their future and that his love shall always surround them. And so I believe that they shall grow up, first creeping and toddling, then standing, stretching skyward for 2 decades until they reach full stature, a man and a woman. I believe that they can and will be molded and shaped between infancy and adulthood, as a tree is shaped by the gardener or the clay vessel in the potter's hand, or the shoreline of the sea under the watery hand of mighty wave, by home and church, by school and street, through sight and sound, and the touch of my hand on their hand, and Christ's Spirit on their heart. This I believe, that they shall mature as only human beings can, through laughter and sorrow, affection and discipline, until they stretch their wings and leave their nests to fly. Oh God, I believe in my children. Help me so to live that they may always believe in me and so believe in thee. And everyone said, would you bow your heads in prayer, dear friends?